Black judge unjustly accused of theft in a luxury store, faces enormous humiliation in front of everyone, but his reaction at the end leaves everyone completely surprised. Henry Foster walked into Harrods department store, admiring the opulence that surrounded him. The chandeliers sparkled intensely, reflecting light in 1,000 directions, while exotic perfumes lingered in the air, creating an almost magical atmosphere. He paused for a moment, allowing himself to be swept away by the beauty of the environment, before remembering the urgency of his mission. His mother was in the hospital, and he had promised to bring her a special gift, something that could brighten her day. With a gentle smile on his face, Henry walked toward the jewelry section, where the dazzling pieces seemed to dance under the light. I need to find something she will truly love, he thought, imagining the look of joy on her face when she received the necklace. As he browsed the shelves, his fingers glided over the velvet boxes, each containing a more stunning piece than the last. However, he couldn't help but notice some suspicious glances directed at him. A group of customers who had previously been engrossed in their own consumer desires now watched the judge with expressions of distrust. What's wrong with them? Henry thought, but decided to ignore it. After all, he was a respected judge, known for his integrity and commitment to justice. Meanwhile, Richard Thompson, the store manager, observed from a distance with a critical eye. He had always harbored a disdain for people who didn't fit his consumer standards, and upon noticing Henry, he decided it was time to act. The man in the dark suit approached, his imposing presence seeming to intimidate even those closest to him. You're trying to steal something, aren't you? Richard snapped, his voice sharp as a blade. The tone of reproach was evident, and his words echoed through the store, drawing the attention of everyone around. Henry, taken aback and offended, raised his hands in a defensive gesture. No, not at all. I'm just looking for a gift for my mother who is sick in the hospital. You can check the cameras. I haven't done anything wrong. Cameras? So you think you can escape this just by showing your charming side? Richard laughed mockingly. No one is going to believe you. You're just another thief trying to pass yourself off as a respectable person. The commotion in the store grew, and murmurs of disapproval began to spread among the customers. Henry felt his face burn with embarrassment as all eyes turned against him. Please, you need to understand. This is a misunderstanding, he pleaded, his voice filled with frustration. But Richard was unwilling to listen. He gestured to the store security, who quickly approached. Take him out. He doesn't belong here, Richard commanded, his voice raised as if he were sentencing a criminal. The judge, a figure who had always sought to protect the rights of others, now found himself in an unimaginable situation, being treated like a criminal. The security guards, hesitant, moved closer to Henry. Sir, please, we need you to come with us, one said, his expression uncomfortable. It's a matter of protocol. Protocol? Is that what you call justice? Henry shot back, indignation spilling over in his words. I'm a judge. I haven't done anything wrong. But his words fell on deaf ears. He was being dragged out of the store while the public watched, some with expressions of shock, others with smirks of satisfaction. Outside, Henry's humiliation was palpable. He felt as though the ground had opened up beneath his feet. The respected judge, now exposed and discredited, looked around, seeking support in the faces of strangers passing by. But all he found was indifference and disdain. The world that once felt so familiar now seemed hostile and threatening. How can this be happening? He murmured to himself as he walked away from the store, feeling as though his dignity had been brutally stripped away. Henry Foster slowly walked through the hospital corridors, the smell of antiseptic hanging in the air. His heart was heavy at the thought of the humiliation he had faced in the department store. He stopped in front of his mother's room, where the soft afternoon light filtered through the window, creating a serene atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the emotional turmoil consuming him. Upon opening the door, he saw his mother, a woman with a gentle gaze, reclining in bed, with a smile that lit up her face, even amidst the fragility of her health. Hi, my son, she said, her voice soft and encouraging. How was your day? Henry hesitated, feeling the sting of shame rising in his throat. Oh, Mom, something happened. Something bad. I was accused of theft at Harrods. His mother's smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. Theft? But you're a judge, Henry. That doesn't make sense. I know, he murmured, running a hand through his hair nervously. Richard Thompson, the manager, wouldn't listen to what I had to say. Everyone looked at me as if I were a criminal. She reached out, lightly touching his hand. My son, I know you're innocent. This is just a testament to the ignorance and prejudice of people. You can't let this bring you down. You must fight for your dignity." Henry took a deep breath, feeling his mother's words serve as a balm amid his despair. "But what if I fail? What if no one believes me? You're not alone. Remember, you've always been a fighter. Don't forget what you represent. Your life and career matter, and you must defend that," she said firmly. He nodded, determined not to let the injustice go unchallenged. As they talked, the decision to fight blossomed in his heart like a rekindled flame. That same night at home, Henry sat at his desk, papers scattered around him. The city lights sparkled outside his window, but he felt isolated in a sea of uncertainties. He looked at a photo of his mother on the desk. Her serene smile seemed to encourage him. "I can't let this slide," he murmured to himself. "I can't allow this injustice to define me." Henry picked up the phone and began searching for lawyers. The sound of the keyboard echoed his determination. He needed someone to help him confront Richard and Harrods. But on the other hand, he also felt a weight in his heart, questioning whether he truly had the strength to face this giant. Meanwhile, Emily Blake, a young attorney who had witnessed the scene in the store, was in her small apartment, filled with doubts and concerns. What she had witnessed left her unsettled. Richard had not only attacked Henry, but had also exposed the vulnerabilities of all who had ever been victims of discrimination. She couldn't just stand by. "I need to do something," she said to herself as she paced back and forth in her living room. "This isn't just about Henry. It's about all of us." Determined, Emily began researching the department store. Hours passed as she dug deeper, and with each new piece of information she uncovered, her indignation grew. "I can't believe this happens. I can't believe people are still treated this way," she murmured, typing frantically. It was then that, while rummaging through some old files, she discovered that Harrods had a history of discrimination. Her heart raced as she realized that Henry's situation could be part of a larger pattern. "I need proof, and I need support," she thought, her mind buzzing with ideas. The next day, she decided to visit Margaret Evans, the cleaner who had been present during the incident. With a knot in her throat, Emily arrived at the store, her heart pounding. She knew the risk Margaret faced in speaking out, but the need for justice drove her forward. "Hi, Margaret," Emily said, trying to appear confident. "I'm Emily, the attorney who was at Harrods when everything happened. Do you remember me?" Margaret looked at Emily, hesitant. "Yes, I remember, but I don't know if I should talk about it. I need my job." "I understand, but Henry is innocent. He didn't deserve what happened to him, and if you can help us, it could make a difference," Emily pleaded, her eyes filled with sincerity. Margaret sighed, her gaze drifting into memories. "I've seen many injustices here, but it's risky. I could lose my job. I promise we'll handle it the right way. We can't let this continue." "You're not alone," Emily said with contagious determination. Margaret's hesitation began to fade, and she finally nodded, feeling touched by the young attorney's courage. "All right, I'll think about it." Thus, while Henry began to gather his inner strength, Emily and Margaret were preparing to unite their voices in a struggle that could change the course of their lives and many others. The battle for dignity was just beginning. Emily decided she could not let Henry's situation go unaddressed. With determination, she approached Margaret, knowing she had witnessed the incident at Harrods. Arriving at the building where Margaret worked, she felt a chill in her stomach. She knew the woman might hesitate to get involved, fearing for her job. Yet Henry's courage inspired her to take the risk. "Hi, Margaret," Emily called, finding the cleaner in one of the hallways, holding a broom. "Do you have a minute?" Margaret looked at Emily with a mix of surprise and concern. "Hi, Ms. Blake, what do you need?" "I'd like to talk about what happened at Harrods. I know you were there, and your testimony could really help Henry," Emily said, her tone filled with hope. Margaret hesitated, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear her. I don't know if I can talk about it. What if I lose my job? I understand your fear, but Henry deserves justice. And this isn't just about him. It's about all of us who face discrimination and injustice. You're not alone, Margaret. We can make a difference together." Margaret's expression softened. "You have no idea what I saw. The way that manager treated him. It was horrible." "Then will you help me?" Emily asked, encouraging her to speak out. Margaret took a deep breath. "Okay, I'll think about it." They said their goodbyes, but Emily knew she had ignited a small flame of courage inside the woman. In the following days, Emily immersed herself in her investigations. She discovered that Harrods had a history of discrimination, As she reviewed documents and accounts from customers and employees, she realized the gravity of the situation Henry faced. She felt that her fight was also against a system that allowed abusive behaviors to thrive. With the information she gathered, Emily decided it was time to reach out to Margaret again. She found her during her lunch break in the small staff room. The woman was sitting alone, looking out the window. "Margaret, I need you," Emily said as she entered. "I found more cases of discrimination at Harrods. We need to act now." "I saw the news reports on TV," Margaret replied, looking at the floor. "That courtroom scene, I can't stop thinking about it. You have to speak up. Your voice is important. You can inspire other people to stand up," Emily insisted, her passion for the cause radiating. "But what if Richard finds out I spoke? He's powerful." Margaret hesitated. "Richard may be powerful, but you have the truth on your side, and we're not alone. I'll reach out to some civil rights organizations. They can help support us. We need people like you, willing to fight." With a determined look, Margaret finally agreed. "Okay, I will speak out. I can't let this injustice continue. Henry doesn't deserve this." The two joined a civil rights group that was willing to support Henry's cause. Emily and Margaret worked side by side, organizing a small event to bring together witnesses. Margaret increasingly felt empowered by Emily's determination and the desire for justice. At one of the meetings, as several people gathered to hear the experiences of discrimination they had faced, Margaret took the floor. With a trembling but firm voice, she began to recount what she had witnessed on the day of the incident at Harrods. "I was there," she began, her voice echoing in the room. "I saw how Henry was treated. He wasn't doing anything wrong, just trying to buy a gift for his mother. But instead of receiving respect, he was treated like a criminal." The room fell silent as she continued, each word laden with emotion. "I'm a cleaner. Often I'm ignored, invisible. But what happened to Henry made me realize I can't stay silent. If we don't stand up against this, who will?" Margaret's words resonated, and the room filled with support and applause. Emily watched, moved, knowing that every step they were taking was a step toward justice. The struggle was just beginning, and they were determined to make a difference. The courtroom was packed, and the atmosphere was thick with tension as Judge Henry Foster entered the room. He felt like a stranger in his own city, a man of the law now reduced to a defendant, and the curious, critical glances from the audience made his stomach churn. The incessant clicking of cameras echoed like a constant reminder of the tragedy unfolding. He sat in his chair, adjusting his tie, while his heart raced. Across the room, Richard Thompson, the manager of Harrods, appeared confident, a smug smile on his lips. Henry couldn't bear the sight of the man who had ruined his reputation. He needed to focus. He couldn't let anger and humiliation overtake him. The first witness was called, and the room fell silent. It was the janitor, Margaret Evans, who, despite her initial hesitation, was determined to share her version of events. Margaret stepped up to the witness stand, her heart pounding. She cast a nervous glance at Henry, who gave her an encouraging nod. "You can do it, Margaret," he seemed to say without words. As she began to speak, her voice trembled, but the memories of that fateful day came rushing back, and her courage began to solidify. "I saw everything," she said, looking directly at the judge. "Mr. Foster was just buying a gift for his mother. He did nothing wrong." She took a deep breath, feeling the support of Henry and Emily at her sides. "Richard saw me and immediately decided he was guilty just because he looked different, and that's not fair." Richard stood up, interrupting Margaret. "You were alone in the store, Margaret. Your word isn't enough. You don't know what really happened there," he shot back, trying to discredit her. "But I do, Richard," Margaret replied, her voice now stronger. "I saw how you acted with disdain. I saw how you treated the judge. He didn't deserve that. No one deserves to be treated like that just because of their appearance." The audience began to murmur in support, and several people in the courtroom nodded in agreement with her words. The judge, who had been listening intently, seemed to weigh Margaret's words. He looked at Richard, who was visibly uncomfortable, and turned his gaze back to the janitor. "Please continue, Margaret," he said, his voice calm. "What else can you tell us about that day?" Margaret seized the opportunity. "I'm a simple woman with a humble job, but I've always believed that everyone deserves dignity. Mr. Foster is a man who has dedicated his life to justice. He is not a thief. He is a respected judge, and what happened to him could happen to any one of us." The courtroom was silent, but Richard's gaze was a mixture of anger and frustration. He knew that Margaret's statement could turn the tide in favor of Henry, and that made him even more anxious. After Margaret's emotional testimony, the room began to fill with murmurs of support. Emily Blake, the attorney who had been observing the testimony, felt an urge to act. She knew she needed to respond, and Margaret's strength inspired her. When called to conduct her questioning, Emily stood up, determination shining in her eyes. "Margaret, do you remember any other incidents of discrimination you witnessed in the store?" Emily's question echoed through the room, and everyone awaited the answer. "Yes," Margaret replied, her face lighting up with the confidence that was growing within her. "I've seen others being treated unfairly. I myself have been a target of DI. People look at me and judge my worth by what I do and how I appear. That needs to end." The judge listened closely, and the tension in the room felt palpable. Supportive glances turned to Henry, who felt his spirit lift. He was fighting for more than just his own dignity. He was fighting for everyone who had been unjustly treated. Margaret's words echoed in everyone's minds, and the courtroom began to rally in support of Henry. The story of injustice and discrimination unfolding there started to touch hearts, and the room seemed to unite in a single call for justice. Henry sat on the defendant's bench, his heart racing, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through his body. He looked around the courtroom where the audience was gathered, familiar and unfamiliar faces, all eyes fixed on him. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and he felt like a stranger in his own city, a judge now treated like a criminal. The humiliation he felt at Harrods still burned in his memory, but now as he looked at Emily and Margaret, he sensed there was something bigger at stake. He had a chance to fight, not just for himself, but for all those who had been silenced. "Are you ready for this?" Emily whispered, sitting beside him, determination shining in her eyes like a light in the darkness. The young lawyer had become an unexpected ally, and Henry felt grateful to have someone so passionate by his side. "I'm willing to try, Emily," Henry replied, his voice steady despite his anxiety. "I can't let this injustice prevail. We must fight for those who have no voice." The judge looked at the defense table where Richard's lawyer, a man in a dark suit with an arrogant demeanor, was preparing his strategy. He knew the case wouldn't be easy. Richard had the resources and the power of a big name, but Henry was determined not to be discouraged. The first witness called was Margaret. As she rose and walked to the podium, a reverent silence enveloped the courtroom. The janitor, a middle-aged woman with a serious expression, appeared nervous, but the determination in her eyes was undeniable. "Margaret, can you tell us what happened that day at Harrods?" asked the prosecuting attorney, his voice soft and encouraging. "Yes," Margaret began, her voice trembling slightly. "I was cleaning near the jewelry section when I saw Judge Henry. He looked so lost, gazing at the jewelry, as if searching for something special." She took a deep breath, recalling the embarrassing moment. "When the alarm went off, I saw Richard approach him, yelling and pointing his finger. No one believed what was. Everyone stared at him as if he were a thief. Richard, sitting next to his lawyer, rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed by Margaret's account. "If you were there, you should have seen that he was acting suspiciously," he retorted, trying to undermine the janitor. "Suspicious?" Margaret responded, her voice now more assertive. "He was just trying to buy a gift. Judge Henry would never do something like that. What I witnessed was pure and simple discrimination. An honest man being treated like a criminal because of his appearance and status." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Henry felt moved by Margaret's courage. He knew those words were painful, but they were also true and necessary. He looked at her, a supportive smile on his lips, and saw her stand taller, gaining strength with each word. "And how did you feel witnessing that?" the prosecutor asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "I felt ashamed," Margaret replied, a tear rolling down her cheek. "Ashamed to see such a respected man being treated that way. It reminded me of all the times I was discriminated against for being a cleaner. It's a daily struggle, but seeing Judge Henry there, humiliated, it made me want to fight." Henry felt the weight of Margaret's words. He stood up, emotion overwhelming him. "Margaret, you are not alone. I am also a victim of this. And together, we will make this stop. We will fight for justice, not just for me, but for everyone who has gone through this." The judge was beginning to grasp the impact of their words. He might have been just a man in the courtroom, but his voice now resonated like a collective cry for dignity and respect. Emily stepped closer, a proud smile on her lips, and in a gesture of support, held Henry's hand. The atmosphere in the courtroom began to shift. The people in the room leaned forward, absorbing every word, every emotion. The judge, who had once seemed an isolated figure, was now a symbol of resistance, and Henry's determination appeared to inspire everyone around him. "We are all in this fight together," Henry continued, looking out at the audience, "and together we will not be silenced." He felt a new vigor within him. The struggle for dignity was just beginning, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. The murmurs from the spectators mixed anticipation with anxiety, reflecting the tension that permeated the space. Henry Foster, seated in the defendant's chair, felt the weight of all the eyes on him. The humiliation he faced at Harrods still burned in his memory, but now he was determined to turn the narrative around and fight for justice. Richard Thompson's defense had begun presenting its arguments, and Richard's lawyer, a man in a dark suit with an assertive voice, rose to present a set of documents before the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here are irrefutable proofs that Mr. Foster is not just a thief, but a man of questionable character. He has been accused of a series of infractions, and these allegations are not mere coincidences." Henry's heart raced at the lawyer's words. He looked at Emily, who stood beside him, her expression resolute. She knew they were about to face a significant challenge. Richard's lawyer, sensing the unease in the air, continued, "Moreover, we have documents proving that Mr. Foster was fired from his last job for inappropriate conduct. What he really wants is to divert attention from his failures and portray himself as a martyr." The room fell silent, and Henry felt the urge to defend himself. But before he could speak, Emily stood up. "Excuse me, Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and firm. The judge gestured for her to proceed. "Those documents we just heard are forged," Emily declared, with a conviction that echoed throughout the room. The audience was on edge. "If I may, I would like to present evidence proving that Richard Thompson is not a trustworthy man. He has a history of discrimination and harassment in his previous jobs." Richard's defense immediately rose, trying to interrupt. "This is irrelevant. We are here to discuss my client's actions, not Richard Thompson's." "It is not irrelevant," Emily shot back, challenging him with her gaze. "If Richard has a history of questionable behavior, it makes his allegations against Henry even more suspicious. I request that you review this evidence." Meanwhile, Margaret sat in the witness chair, feeling nervous but aware that she needed to make a difference. She recalled all the times she faced discrimination at work, all the times she felt invisible and powerless. When her turn to speak came, she took a deep breath and began. "I was there when it all happened. I saw Judge Henry being treated like a criminal when he was just trying to make a purchase. He didn't deserve what happened." Richard's lawyer immediately interjected. "And you, a cleaner, think you have the right to comment on a man of law? What do you know about integrity?" Margaret straightened in her chair, her voice trembling but firm. "I know a lot about integrity. I clean up the traces of dishonesty every day, and I saw how Richard treated Henry. He didn't care about the truth, he only wanted to maintain his image." The gazes turned to the jury, which seemed impressed by Margaret's statement. The judge, who had been listening patiently, leaned forward, intrigued. "Please continue," the judge encouraged. Margaret, bolstered by the empathy she felt from him, continued, "I'm just a cleaner, but that doesn't mean I don't have a voice. People like me face discrimination every day, and what happened to Henry was not just an injustice against him, it was an injustice against all of us who have been silenced." The room fell into absolute silence. Margaret's words resonated in everyone's minds, and the tension that had once filled the space transformed into a wave of silent support. Henry looked at her with gratitude and admiration. He knew that his fight was not just for his dignity, but for everyone who had been unjustly treated. Richard's lawyer, realizing the strength of Margaret's words, decided to change tactics. "Do you truly believe your experiences are relevant to this case?" he questioned, with a dismissive tone. "Yes, I do," Margaret replied, her voice stronger than ever. "Because everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their social standing. And what happened to Henry was a clear indication that this respect was not afforded." As the courtroom absorbed her words, Henry felt a renewed energy within him. He was no longer alone. With Emily and Margaret by his side, the fight for dignity was just beginning. The pressure in the courtroom was mounting, and media coverage of Henry Foster's case was intensifying. On the streets of London, posters and hashtags in support of the judge appeared, and social media buzzed with messages of solidarity. Henry had become a symbol of resistance against discrimination, leaving him both hopeful and apprehensive. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Emily and Margaret watched alongside Henry, feeling the energy pulsating in the air. "Are you ready for this, Henry?" Emily asked, her tone encouraging. She knew the judge was grappling with his own insecurities, but the determination in his gaze inspired her. "I am, but I can't deny that the weight I carry is immense. This isn't just about me, it's about everyone who has suffered from injustices like this," Henry replied, looking at his lawyer with eyes full of resolve. Margaret, sitting next to Henry, squeezed his hand. "You're doing something important, Henry. You're going to change the lives of many with this. Don't give up now." Henry smiled gratefully at Margaret, who had always shown a courage he wished he possessed. He knew she was also dealing with her own fears and insecurities, but her presence was a constant reminder of what they were fighting for. Meanwhile, on the other side of the courtroom, Richard Thompson watched with a nervous expression. His mask of arrogance was beginning to crack under the pressure. He knew public opinion was shifting, and that a favorable verdict for Henry could mean the end of his career. In a moment of desperation, he leaned closer to his lawyer, whispering, "We need to do something. The situation is spiraling out of control." "I understand, Richard, but we can't do anything that could be seen as unethical. We'll need to rely on the evidence we have," the lawyer replied, trying to maintain his composure. Richard frowned, his mind racing with ideas. What if we revealed something personal about him? Something that could discredit him in front of the jury? The lawyer hesitated. That could come off as desperate, and if it backfires, you could end up worse off than you already are. We need a solid strategy. Richard glared at the judge and Henry's lawyer across the courtroom, his anger igniting a fierce determination within him. He decided he wouldn't surrender without a fight. However, the situation was turning in Henry's favor. Each day, more people filled the courtroom to support his cause, and media coverage became increasingly positive. During a break, a reporter approached Emily. "How do you feel knowing your client has become a symbol of the fight against discrimination?" the journalist asked, thrusting a microphone towards Emily. "It's an honor, but this isn't just about him. We're fighting for everyone who has been unjustly silenced. This battle is collective and represents the struggle for dignity and respect," Emily replied, her voice strong and full of conviction. "Do you believe Henry can win?" the reporter pressed. "Yes, I believe. The truth is on our side and we're here to expose it," Emily said, feeling the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Meanwhile, Henry, now surrounded by supporters, felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He looked at Margaret, who was talking with other supporters. Her strength was contagious and he was reminded of why he was there. He wasn't just a judge fighting for his dignity. He was the voice of everyone who had been treated unjustly. "Come on, Henry," shouted a woman from the crowd. "We believe in you." Henry's heart raced and he felt a surge of courage. He was not alone. With a smile on his face, he took a deep breath and prepared for the next day of trial. He knew the fight wasn't over, but he was more determined than ever to face Richard and expose the truth. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, almost palpable. Henry, seated at the defense table, looked at the jury as they prepared to deliberate. He felt the weight of their gazes, a mix of hope and apprehension. Beside him, Emily and Margaret shared the same anxiety. The room was filled with supporters and journalists, all anticipating that justice would prevail. "Are you okay?" Emily whispered, looking at Henry with concern. "Yeah, just a little nervous," he replied, trying to keep his composure. "It's hard to believe this is happening. I never thought it would be me standing here, fighting against such absurd accusations." Margaret, who had become a close friend to Henry during the process, held his hand. "You're not alone, Henry. We're all here for you. If we don't fight for our dignity, who will?" Henry smiled, grateful for their support. He took a deep breath, trying to remember his mother's words, which always encouraged him to stay strong in tough times. "Thank you, Margaret. That means a lot to me." The judge, with a neutral expression, observed the movement in the room and finally called for silence. "The jury will now retire to deliberate. I thank everyone for their patience and attention to this case." The jurors stood up and left the room, taking with them the heavy burden of responsibility that weighed on them. Meanwhile, the tension in the courtroom escalated and murmurs intensified. Henry turned to Emily, who was staring at the door with a concentrated expression. "Do you think they'll see the truth?" he asked, insecurity evident in his voice. "We have to believe they will," Emily replied firmly. "You did an excellent job, Henry. Your honesty and courage are inspiring. They can't ignore." Henry nodded but still felt the shadow of doubt looming over him. Richard, on the other hand, was in a corner of the room, gesturing to his lawyers, seemingly confident that his strategy to discredit Henry would succeed. "He won't give up easily," Margaret murmured, watching Richard. But you can't let him bring you down. You're stronger than that. Henry smiled faintly, feeling grateful to have such courageous people by his side. I'll try. I can't let myself get discouraged now. The atmosphere grew increasingly quiet, and the wait became torturous. Time seemed to drag on, each minute stretching into eternity. Finally, after hours of waiting, the jurors returned, and the room fell into absolute silence. The judge looked at the jury foreman. Is the jury ready to present its verdict? The man, visibly nervous, nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Please proceed. After deliberations, we find the defendant, Henry Foster, not guilty of the charges of theft. A deafening silence engulfed the room before applause erupted. Henry felt a wave of relief and emotion wash over him. He stood up, looking around with tears in his eyes. The victory was his, but it was also for everyone who fought by his side. We did it, Emily whispered, her eyes shining. Margaret was in tears, overwhelmed with emotion. I knew you could do it, Henry. Henry turned to them, his heart overflowing with gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for believing in me. As the room celebrated, Richard watched. Fury and disbelief etched on his face. He never imagined the situation would take such a turn. Amidst the clamor, he stood up, trying to regain his composure, but the weight of defeat was evident. This isn't over, he murmured to himself, as journalists crowded around him, ready to ask questions. Henry, now surrounded by his friends and supporters, felt that the fight for dignity and justice had only just begun. He hadn't just defended himself. He had become a symbol of resistance against discrimination and injustice. Looking at Emily and Margaret, he knew that together they could face any challenge that lay ahead. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, an almost palpable silence enveloping everyone present. The hours of waiting felt eternal, each second dragging on as they awaited the jury's verdict. Henry, sitting at the front, felt his heart racing. Beside him, Emily and Margaret held his hands, offering silent yet powerful support. The expressions of nervousness and hope mingled on their faces, reflecting the gravity of the moment. The judge, with an impassive expression, surveyed the room. He seemed aware of the weight of what he was about to announce. The murmurs from the journalists, eagerly awaiting any movement, heightened the atmosphere of anticipation. Richard Thompson, in his corner, struggled to maintain an unshaken demeanor, but his pallor betrayed the nervousness that gripped him. He fidgeted in his chair, his fingers drumming on the table as his eyes fixated on the jury, as if he could hypnotize them into making the decision he so desperately desired. Finally, the judge rose. The courtroom fell silent in an instant, all eyes turning. The jury has reached a verdict, he announced, his firm voice echoing through the room. Please bring in the jury. The jurors entered one by one, their expressions ranging from seriousness to a hint of smiles. Henry felt the weight of their gazes, the responsibility pressing down on him. The judge gestured for everyone to be seated, and one of the jurors, a middle-aged man with glasses, stood up. His voice was low but clear. On behalf of the jury, we find the defendant, Henry Foster, not guilty of the charges of theft. A cheer erupted from the audience. Henry could barely contain the tears that threatened to spill down his face. He stood up slowly, and for a moment, the world around him faded away. Emily and Margaret embraced him, their voices joining in spontaneous celebration. We did it, Henry. You are free, Emily exclaimed, her eyes shining with emotion. This is unbelievable, Margaret cried with joy, the emotion overwhelming her. You fought for the truth and for dignity. I'm so proud of you. As the room exploded with applause and shouts of celebration, Richard, in his corner, found himself paralyzed. His face twisted in rage and disbelief. He stood, trying to regain his composure, but the words escaped him. This can't be happening, he murmured to himself, as journalists began to swarm around him, eager to question him. The judge, noticing the commotion, banged his gavel. Silence, please. This courtroom is a space for justice. He looked at Richard, his expression a mix of disapproval and disdain. You will have the opportunity to explain yourself. Your conduct during this trial will be duly examined. Now surrounded by reporters, Richard tried to back away, but they wouldn't give him space. Richard, what do you have to say about the allegations of discrimination and harassment that arose during the trial? One journalist shouted, thrusting a microphone in his direction. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain his calm. This is just an attempt to discredit my character, Richard said, his voice shaky. I have nothing to hide. The truth is that Henry Foster was not a judge worthy of trust. The words sounded hollow, and the disbelief in his eyes showed that he knew the battle was lost. Meanwhile, Henry, still in a state of shock, looked at the audience, where familiar and unfamiliar faces expressed support. He realized that the fight for dignity was not just his, but for all those who had suffered unjustly. "This is a moment for all of us," he declared, his voice echoing in the room. "This is not just about my innocence, but about the fight against discrimination. May this verdict serve as a reminder that we must stand up against injustice. Always." The courtroom erupted in applause again, and Henry felt the strength of solidarity around him. He knew the battle was just beginning, but at that moment, the victory over humiliation was a significant step. Months after the verdict that acquitted Henry Foster, the atmosphere around him had changed dramatically. He had become a respected public figure, admired not only for his integrity as a judge but also for his bravery in facing injustices. That sunny afternoon, Henry was about to receive an award for his efforts in promoting equality and justice at a community event that brought together local leaders and human rights activists. The auditorium was packed, and the anticipation was palpable. As Henry entered the venue, he was met with warm applause. He looked out at the audience and saw familiar faces, including Emily Blake, the young lawyer who had become his friend and ally, and Margaret Evans, the janitor who had shown remarkable courage by testifying in his favor. The three figures, united by a common cause, had now become symbols of resistance and hope. As the event organizer took the stage, Henry felt his heart race. "Today we celebrate not just the victory of one man, but the collective fight for dignity and justice," the organizer said, his voice firm. "It is an honor to present the Justice and Equality Award to Henry Foster." Henry stepped onto the stage, a shy smile on his face. He looked at the crowd and before beginning his speech took a deep breath. "Thank you, everyone. This is an honor I never expected to receive, but more than that, it is a recognition of the work we all do together." Applause echoed throughout the auditorium. Emily, in the back, turned to Margaret and said, "He truly deserves this. Henry isn't just a judge, he's the voice of many who have been silenced." Margaret nodded, emotional. "And I never thought my voice could make a difference. He gave me courage." Henry continued, his voice firm and clear. "When I was accused of something I didn't do, it wasn't just my dignity at stake. It was the dignity of everyone who faces discrimination and injustice every day. What happened to me at Harrods wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a much larger problem that affects our society." The faces in the audience were attentive, some with tears in their eyes. He went on, "It's easy to feel powerless, but together, we can change this. Each of us has the power to stand up and say enough to injustice. Let's keep fighting for a world where everyone is treated with respect and dignity." When the speech ended, the audience erupted into applause. Henry stepped down from the stage, feeling lighter. Emily and Margaret surrounded him, beaming. "You were amazing, Henry," Emily exclaimed, her smile lighting up her face. "Thank you for everything, Henry. You changed my life," Margaret said, her voice choked with emotion. "I never thought I would have the courage to speak up, but you inspired me." As they talked, the energy of the event intensified. People approached to congratulate him, some sharing their own stories of struggle and resilience. Amidst the applause and congratulations, Henry realized the importance of his journey, not just for himself but for all those who felt invisible and powerless. However, as the celebration continued, Richard Thompson, the arrogant manager of Harrods, was facing a new reality. He had become the target of investigations regarding his behavior during the incident with Henry, and after a series of revelations, was fired from his position. At a press conference, he tried to maintain composure, but frustration was evident. "This is a witch hunt. I was just doing my job," he argued, but his words failed to convince anyone. "You forgot that your position does not grant you the right to humiliate others," retorted a journalist, as the crowd of reporters swarmed around him. Richard, visibly irritated, walked away, feeling the weight of his actions haunting him. Back at the event, Henry, Emily, and Margaret gathered in a corner, laughing and reminiscing about moments from the trial. "I never imagined we would be here, celebrating," Henry said, smiling. "All of this is a result of the courage of each one of us. And we can't stop here," Emily added, determined. "We need to keep fighting so that stories like yours do not repeat. The struggle for dignity is an ongoing effort." Margaret, with a sparkle in her eyes, said, "Yes, and together we are stronger. Let's make a difference." The conversation unfolded amidst laughter and promises of a better future. Henry's story, which began with humiliation, was now becoming a beacon of hope, proving that collective courage can transform lives and confront the injustices that still persist in society. We've reached the end of this moving story. If you enjoyed it and want to see more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Right now, there's a playlist of videos on your screen. If you want to keep watching these touching stories, just click on it and you'll start watching. And now, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from, and leave your like to support our work. Now, a sincere question. Do you agree with what happened in the story? We want to know your opinion. Until the next video.